People ask me why Before They Awaken is a title. Well, you won't believe me, but I'll tell you anyway. I was going to call it The Journey. I've been working on this crazy thing since 1999. But after the first draft, I was going to call it The Journey because it is a spiritual journey. That's the whole the evolutionary journey of spiritual evolutionary journey of man. It's like Charles Darwin was right, half right. It's not just an evolution of the physical form. But anyway, that's what I was going to call it, The Journey. And then one night, right before I was going to bed, I was in that soft meditative state. I hear a voice. Honest to God, I hear a voice. It's the only time in my life, I'm not schizophrenic, it's the only time in my life I ever heard a voice. I was in a small one-bedroom apartment, just me. Hear a voice, and the voice says, call it Before They Awaken. And I wasn't even thinking about the novel. It took me a day or two to fit it together. But it worked. Because we're living in a time prior to our awakening. All our trials and tribulations and the chaos that we experience and the wars we can't seem to keep our nose out of, all that's happening at a time prior to mankind's awakening. But we're on chapter 15. Now I've got to find it. Chapter 15 of Before They Awaken. Where is it? I can't find it. It's called A Guest for Dinner. Let me cycle through and see if I can pull it up real quick here. Computer, the little circle is going. Chapter 15, part 1, chapter 15, A Guest for Dinner. Here it is. Probed Eli. This Messiah to whom you give allegiance, who is he? This time Mahlir answered by looking Eli squarely in the eye, and the two of them dueled that way, in powerful silence. It was Eli who finally yielded this time, after the quiet had reached its intolerable peak. The prophet Micah once said of the coming of the Messiah, that when he comes, a man's enemies will be with his own household. Am I to count you among my enemies? Mahlir's response was from the heart. There is one whom I give allegiance to above all others, just one, even above the Messiah. It is my wife, as the future mother of my children, and to you, my Lord, as the father of my wife. Have I not proven this? When forced to choose between Messiah and family, I chose family, did I not? I still choose family. I will always choose family. It took a while for Eli to process the unexpected answer. He was seldom caught speechless. Then he smiled and tipped his head forward in a gesture of humility. It was the first time Mahlir had seen such an expression in his father-in-law. Mahlir looked down at his goblet and ringed it with thumb and forefinger and looked into the wine's dark swirls as if therein he would find answers, like some kind of a soothsayer. Eli's expression of love and acceptance was harder for Mahlir to look upon than the disdain and arrogance which was so typical, though there was another reason for the strange disquiet that had shrouded Mahlir's temperament. The men he had killed back at the aqueduct were weighing on his mind. It was the same type of disquiet that had come in the wake of the Roman soldier's death that seemed to have imprinted itself upon his soul. At the aqueduct he had been given no choice. But still it was there, the vacuous and dark inner thing that refused all but shallow breaths. He'd done the right and honorable thing. His wife and his father-in-law would still be captives, perhaps dead, had he not taken the lives of Athrongus's men. Still it was there, that humble disquiet, as if another cog in the machine had been jammed. A guest was also present for supper, a friend of Eli's, one more intimidating than Eli, not because of the words that came out of his mouth and not because of the condescending way an eyebrow might rise at Mahlir's liberal thoughts, as with his father-in-law, but because of just the opposite. More often than not, this prestigious guest would defend Mahlir's viewpoints, or at least soften them with an acceptance of them as an opinion of intelligence that deserved to be respected, though it be different than his own. This guest was a man of the temple, friend to Eli. This guest's name was Joseph of Marmor, known also as Joseph of Arimathea, since his move to the small town of Arimathea, about 5 miles to the north of Jerusalem. Hence, Joseph was known to answer to as many as 3 names, the most common of which was Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph, too, was conservative, holding to the views of the Sadducees, but was even more skilled than Eli in the art of verbal warfare, having the unique ability of presenting an opposing viewpoint without offending his foe, and doing it powerfully. Joseph of Arimathea was a man in his latter years, approaching the age of Eli, one would guess, from the streaks of gray and white in his beard, though Mahlir never asked. Joseph's long beard, thick and untrimmed, required of a Levite since the days of Moses, and the wrinkles around his eyes gave him as much a look of wisdom and distinction as the most learned priest. Mahlir wondered if his own youthful beard would ever be so full, if ever he would appear as wise in countenance. Joseph was far his superior. He, too, was a respected and influential member of the Sanhedrin, the 72-member council that interpreted and administered Hebrew law and justice, second only to Archelaus and Augustus, in some ways more powerful than both. Many in the temple were frustrated by Joseph of Arimathea because no one really knew what his beliefs were, whether he was a Sadducee or a Pharisee. He was just as passionate about the writings of Isaiah and David as he was about the scrolls of Moses, and conversed learnedly on both. His high black turban gave the streaks of silver in his beard all the more wisdom. He had been listening intently the whole time. Finally, he spoke. "You speak the truth," he said to Eli, "but your young son-in-law also speaks truth." He said it with a smile and a nod of his head, as if to say he knew full well that Eli knew it too. We should not give blind allegiance to a leader simply because he is a leader, be that leader the high priest or the coming Messiah. We should test his leadership with the logic and the morality that exists within our own souls. It is also true that a Messiah is expected. It's not just the wishings of dreamers. With this, he turned to Mahlir. Although, I would imagine that it's quite possible we won't recognize him when he does come, a Messiah sent by God. Certainly wouldn't be robbing and raping and pillaging. That much we can agree on. It's quite obvious that the Messiah is not a Throngis. Would you not agree? Mahlir kept his eyes fixed on Eli's eyes, unwavering, though in delivering his answer, he was speaking to Joseph. Yes, I am ashamed for allowing myself to ever be taken in by his silver tongue and his powerful ways. The young wife of Joseph of Arimathea was also there at supper. Jael was her name. She was a friend of Rachel's. Jael also smiled at what her husband had said and then turned that same smile toward Mahlir, a glance that was simple support for the fact that her husband had rescued Mahlir and had admonished him in all the same breath. The glance lasted more than was typical, though, for such a momentary expression. Mahlir smiled back, then turned away, but felt it necessary to look again because of the surprising intensity the glance held. Jael perceived it and looked up again. A bigger smile curved upon her lips and almost turned into a laugh, as if to make an apology for its boldness. Mahlir looked away again from her strong eyes, looked instead to the safety of the colorful whites, blues, and purples of the garments that flowed over her head to cover most of her black hair. A flash of gold from an earlobe caused him to look away altogether. Joseph was intent in his efforts to make his point. But, he gestured with an index finger and eyes that danced with efforts to transfer the full meaning of his thoughts. Will we recognize the Messiah when he does come? Or will his truth bring things unsettling to us, angering us? Because if he is coming to save us and to give us wisdom, as are the predictions, surely he won't be teaching us in the ways in which we already live. For if we were already living in the ways of righteousness, he wouldn't need to come in the first place now, would he? It is quite possible that the trouble facing us as creatures of God is deeper than that which can be assuaged with threats and rules. Consider this. Could it be that we have no idea what righteousness really is? Could it be that we have no idea what rules there should be in order to govern that type of righteousness? Joseph gestured with his goblet before putting it to his lips as a final profundity of what he hoped would be words absorbed and savored. As it is now, we have defined our concepts of righteousness. We have set down rules and threats of punishment and reprisals if those rules are not followed. God will do such and such if we don't follow this and that rule, strike us with a palsy or visit upon us a famine or kill our firstborn or whatnot. and become creatures who conform because of fear. Could it be, with all our concepts and rules, that we are traveling full speed in the opposite direction? Could it be, with all our concepts and rules, we have no idea what righteousness is? Could it be that this is why God is sending us a Savior? Because we are completely and utterly blind? I have a feeling we as creatures of God are sailing into an uncharted sea, one as vast as time itself. Joseph was well known to Mahlir. Over the years, he had been both friend and mentor, and had often defended, even encouraged Mahler's independence of thought. In one search for truth, he had always said, as one explores the mysteries, self-direction is crucial. After all, he would say, the teacher may be wrong. Eli grumbled, saying something unintelligible, something intended for Mahler's ears, no doubt, but Mahler couldn't understand what he was saying. I have confidence, Mahler went on, that the Messiah will make himself known somehow, whoever he is, whenever he comes, finalized Mahler, when the time is right. He will bring to us righteousness, and he will bring to us lives of freedom. Then Rome will fall. No more will we be subservient to a pagan authority. If you truly believe Rome is so evil, jabbed Eli, goading, looking for a weak spot, why aren't you out there fighting right now? Why are you out there organizing your own army? I will fight, said Mahler. If the true Messiah makes himself known and asks it of me, I will. You will not. You're a coward. The crimson fairly gushed into Mahler's neck and forehead because Eli was right. He was a coward. Eli, of course, did not know it. He was only trying to get a rise out of his son-in-law, but he had scratched open a sore. Mahler had run during the temple battle, while the others had stayed and died. Not only that, his constitution had weakened with thoughts of pity for a Roman soldier, an enemy of God. It was my first battle, he said to himself, as his private apology to God. It will not happen again. It is common for one to have a weak stomach during one's first battle, he kept telling himself. The Macedonians had told him this. When the Anointed One comes, Mahler said, speaking aloud now, I will be there. In his army, I'll be there, marching on Rome, if that's what he asks. You will not. You're a coward. That's why you're a priest. When he comes, said Mahler again. You and all the others like you've been waiting hundreds of years for another David to come along and save you, and you'll be waiting around with your long robes and your little black boxes spouting your pieties until your beards fall out and your teeth rot, until all the messiahs have killed us all, ruined our nation. The mere mention of his phylacteries made Mahler want to reach and touch them, the one in his sleeve and the one in his forehead, just to make sure they were still there, newly oiled and filled with fresh writings. When the Anointed One comes, was all he said. God will see that we recognize him. I'm confident about that. And he will be a king, greater than any king or emperor who has ever ruled on earth. Everyone will follow him, even you, Eli. And once again, we will be a great power, as it was with David. Well, in the meantime, we need to take precautions to secure our safety. At this point, Caesar is the one with the power. Again, Eli was alluding to the unthinkable. Mahler asked him about it. Do you truly believe that Rome can solve our problems? The entire countryside has been in a state of violent disarray since Herod died, Eli went on. Riots everywhere. For years, this has been going on. Thugs wanting to be kings, never gaining more than several hundred followers at a time, never enough to gain a monarchy, but enough to do damage, fighting with each other, fighting with us, murdering our loved ones, robbing from us, raping our women and our daughters. Rachel dropped the goblet she was drinking from. Eli ignored the spillage. Caesar is the only one who can restore order. Archelaus is our leader, Mahler countered, oblivious to Rachel and her anxiety as she was bending to assist Shammah in wiping up the spill. He is Herod's son. Let us leave it to him to restore order. Let us give our allegiance to him. At least he is a Jew. He's a Jew because his grandfather was forced to convert and be circumcised at the sword point of the Maccabees. But it doesn't matter. Jews or Gentiles, the Herods are not effective leaders. The rioting continues. Archelaus isn't even here. As we speak, he is on another trip to Rome while his country burns at the hands of its own people. But the worst of it happens when he is here. He's like a tyrant. He's like his father. Someday the soldiers of Archelaus may knock on your door and drag you away in chains simply because you are an innocent man. Trust me, it has happened to many a Jew. We not only have to worry about the bandits in the hills, we have to worry about our own king. Eli had dropped the condescension and was now speaking low and serious, leaning confessionally forward on his ailing elbow as though Mahlir was now a confidant. I intend to travel to Rome with some of the other landowners to petition to have Judea annexed to Syria. We intend to ask that Archelaus not be confirmed as king and that a procurator be named to govern in his place. This before I, too, am burned out by my own people. Mahlir was horror-struck. He could not believe what he was hearing. Eli could read it in his face. Annexation is not a new idea, he went on, nor is it mine alone. It was first proposed 5 years ago, a year after Herod's death, following a year of living under the intolerable oppression of Archelaus. 50 of our people, myself included, traveled to Rome and petitioned Caesar for that very thing, that we be made a part of Syria. We told of how he betook for himself the authority of a tyrant and put upon us such abuses as a wild beast would not have done. We told Caesar we desired no more to live under the governorship of a kingship. Archelaus was there, and he spoke in his own defense. Others were there, friends of Archelaus, and offered their testimony on his behalf. Caesar decided in his favor. He decided to continue to honor the elder Herod's deathbed wishes and allow the country to stand divided into its 4 parts, with Archelaus continuing on as the tetrarch of Judea and Samaria on a trial basis, conditioned upon him ruling over us virtuously. This has not happened. I intend to return and to again petition the emperor. You can't be serious. You wish to live in complete subservience to a foreign power? Maybe under Rome we will finally stop warring with one another. Maybe then. Mahlir could take no more. In a burst of anger, he bounded to his feet and strode from the room. And from there, he left the home. In passing the security of the gate, between the 2 guardian lamps, serenely burning pans as large as ox carts on tripods higher than a man's head, he felt suddenly alone, the anger washed away by the blackness beyond which was the great sea, whence blew an easterly wind that tossed his hair and battered about his phylactery, wind rich with the scent of salt and of the open sea, and of creatures fantastic, and of the intrigue of the unknown. A storm was coming. Above him was an opening in the cloud cover, as if someone had peeled back a window to the stars, an almost perfectly square hole in the sky. The wind was cold. Had it not been for the cloak Eli bought him entire, he would be shivering. The sand was still warm, holding in the heat of the day. Its color, yellow by daylight, silver by night, had been given a luster ever the brighter by the unique illumination from above, from the moon hiding behind the chiseled edges of that cloud opening that seemed to be its own source of light. God's compluvium. It was tranquil, peaceful, while the wind below was whipping itself to a roar. It was as if Yahweh himself was looking down, shaming Mahlir for his childish outburst. He felt something brush his side. Jesus of Sai. He bent down, hands on knees. Is Jesus a good boy? The animal forced the obligatory snarl and happily wagged its arched tail. Mahlir rumpled the dog's head, feeling a little less lonely, and made his way further down toward the water to seat himself against a solitary tree sprouting out of the sand. Soon there came another, something else familiar, Rachel's touch on his shoulder, and a voice that filled him with warmth. Let me tell you a story. Something that happened years ago, she said. Then perhaps you will understand Father a bit more. Her hair, normally covered and veiled, was long and loose and gleamed under the shine of the moon. The moon now was fully visible through the opening. It brought enchantment to everything it touched, the gold in the rings of her bracelets, the spindles of her glass-encrusted earrings, the cresting tips of the distant black ocean swells, the falling foam of the surf. She rested herself beside her husband and rolled her hands inside her long blue and white pallium and dug her feet, enclosed in lace-up Roman buskins, into the warm sand. Why are you wearing jewels and things of the Romans and the Greeks? Mahlir asked. in protest to what was really quite appealing to him, something he dared not admit in the sight of God, the way the jewelry quickened the beat of his heart and the way it gave rush to his senses. Coming also, dancing inside his head, was a soft aroma of perfume, pagan also, likely. She looked at him in frustration and snared his head between her hands. One corner of her mouth lifted, concealing laughter. That was how she smiled, with one corner of her mouth, but somehow it always came out charmingly instead of as a sneer, the way it would with anybody else. My Roman shoes. She lifted and wiggled one of her ankles in front of him as if to admire the footwear. Father bartered with the goddess Diana for them. Yeah, took them right off her feet, right off the feet of one of her nymphs. Come to think of it, no, I think he took it from the very feet of Diana herself. Beautiful feet, full and lovely, not small and white like everybody else's, but beautiful feet. And the jewelry, worn at one time by the ancient temple prostitutes of Jezebel, maybe by Jezebel herself. They are items that have the power to sway the minds of young men. Do not trifle about such things, Mahlir said. Would you be still with your words, she ordered, and placed a kiss upon his lips while I tell you my story. First, there's something I must tell you, he said. Everything alive inside her became corpse-like because she knew what it was her husband was about to say, was about to do by law. He was going to announce the divorcement, or perhaps even her execution at the city gate. Please, she whispered, not now. It's important. I've been waiting to get you alone, Mahlir said. She touched 2 fingers to his lips. Not now, not yet. This you need to know. It's about family. Because if you speak first to tell me what you must tell me, I may never tell you this, and this is far more important. He relinquished, and with her hand in his, looking out at the sea, darkened now by the closing over of the hole in the sky, she began. Have you ever wondered why I have no mother? Haven't you ever wondered why it is only Father and I and the servants that live in our large house? Have you never been curious why I have no brothers or sisters? It is because my mother is dead. It is also because my baby brother is dead. That much he knew. It had been a tragedy of some kind, a mass slaughter by outlaws, some said. Romans, others speculated. A few suggested in hushed whispers that it may have been Herod himself who had decreed the massacre, though no one dared speak such an accusation openly, as long as any one of the Herods remained in power. Let me tell you how it happened. More than 4 seasons back, we lived in Bethlehem. It was suitably located for Father's business. It was the hub of his travels, connecting the temple to the east, the fields to the north, and the port cities to the west. One normal morning, shortly after we had risen for the day, the world erupted in evil. Soldiers swept down upon us from the surrounding hills. It was just the oddest thing. The children of the city were at play. Some were being bathed by their mothers. A few were still asleep. The youngest of them were suckling at their mother's breasts. Some were still in their mother's wombs. I can remember the aroma of the breakfast fires. My brother was 3.5. He was playing with a pile of rocks. I remember that, building a house for his toy soldiers, his tiny heroes. Suddenly, there was a feeling that 1,000 eyes were upon us. I was on my way to the well for water when my brother pointed to the east. A row of soldiers had appeared, every 10th one on horseback, his heroes. Then the horizon to the west opened up with soldiers. Then to the north, then to the south. They were encircling us, and they remained there for the longest time, ringing us, studying us. Our own soldiers. It was such a strange sight. At first, I thought maybe they were there to protect us, or the thought occurred to me, they were there to gather forces for a mighty assault on Rome. That's probably what my brother was thinking. He probably thought the Messiah was among them, come at last to select good men from each town and village. Always, when my brother would play with his stone soldiers, he would choose the biggest one and make it the Messiah. Then he would have great battles in the sand of his playland. The soldiers, after waiting in silence for the longest time, began thundering inward. Hard for me to speak of this. Swords held high, the foot soldiers close behind to kill those that had escaped the cavalry. I couldn't believe what was happening. I saw a bearded horseman wield his sword at a fleeing child. hunting it down, passing adult men and women by. The terror in the child's eyes I still see as the blade sliced off the top of her words fell off into a trembling mumble. She drew in a breath, held it, then let it out, along with the rest of what she needed to say. I remember his body bouncing off the ground. I remember his arms and legs flopping, then going still. I remember the contents of his skull spilling out. She was shaking horribly now. Lord help us. Oh, they were after our children with purposes unknown. The images blur in my mind. I tried to grab my baby brother, but it happened too fast. A sword came slashing across his face, right through his eyes. A line of red appeared and dripped down his face. I think I saw one of his eyes fall out. She looked up like she was trying to figure it out. But you know what? He didn't cry. He just had this look of surprise. His mouth was open, but no sound was coming out. Then he slumped to the ground. She pointed eastward. Somewhere out there are the bones of my baby brother, unmarked, unsanctified. No Shiva. Somewhere. For the longest time, she didn't speak. My brother had a round little face, she finally went on, needing to talk more about it. Her voice was now barely audible, so softly did it come. He was proud of himself because he was 4. He was only 3.5, but he used to like to think he was 4. He would always say, with such force in his tiny voice, "I'm 4." He used to cry when I'd hug and kiss him because he was 4, too big to be hugged and kissed. Everything was adventure, everything. Building his houses with rocks, building his roads, just like the Romans. It was all an adventure. The birds of the air, the crawling insects, everything filled him with excitement. Each word the child spoke would come with enthusiasm. He saved each one of his rocks. They were his playthings. Each night he would save them in his special corner. He used to sleep with me at night because he was afraid of the dark. He knew that I would protect him. I used to lay my hand on the top of his head as we both fell off to sleep, and I'd feel warmth inside me, traveling through my hand. My brother, my love, I miss you so much with every breath I take. I shall miss you for as long as I live and love. Are you sure they were not Roman soldiers? I am sure. I know full well the difference between a soldier of Augustus and a soldier of Herod. These were not men adorned in burnished breastplates with capes of red and purple. These were hired mercenaries, the hired mercenaries of Herod, outlaws, paid bodyguards, and assassins. Maybe they were simple marauders, desert bandits, not sent by Herod at all. Oh, no. They wore the black of Herod's guards. And they wore the symbol of our people on their breastplates. Their faces and the varied colorings of their hair and beards showed how different were the origins of their births, as is the mix of the king's army. Germanic tribesmen, some looked to be from lands as far away as Gaul. Some may have been Romans, I suppose, by the fairness of their skin. Some looked like they were Jews, Arabs others, Parthians, Macedonians, any who would fight for Herod at a price, any who would do Herod's bidding, the misfits of the world's societies, any who would put money above conscience, the soldiers of King Herod. But why would he have done such a thing? It makes no sense. Many things Herod did make no sense, Rachel replied. It is said that upon his deathbed, he gave orders that all the heads of families be taken to the hippodrome and killed at the point of his passing so that the country would mourn. When he died, his sister Salome had the men released. It should be remembered, said Mahlir, that some of his deeds were of noble character. Because it was dangerous to speak out against the government, Mahlir just didn't want to do so. It was dangerous to speak out even within families. So out of habit, Mahlir recounted some of the good things done by Herod the Great, this human paradox of good and evil. When the Jews living in Rome were pressed into military service, he went on, he appealed on their behalf and got them excused, because the law given to Moses prohibits us from taking the life of another, and he succeeded in gaining them official military protection under Roman law. In the days of your father's youth, there was a drought that brought a terrible famine to the land. So withered had been the crops that There existed not enough seed even for the planting. Herod melted down his own jewelry and purchased grain from Egypt and had his soldiers distribute the food. His bakers cooked for the sick and elderly. And let us not forget that he rebuilt Solomon's temple and brought water through the aqueducts and modernized the cities and the towns. He made life easier for us. Rachel remained silent, a lonely look inset deep in her face. She said at long last, "It is clear that my husband is more interested in defending the late King Herod than he is in helping ease the pain in my heart. Worse still, it is clear that he is more interested in holding to the traditions of the law than he is in—" She was about to speak of the rape and the law of Moses that would have her stoned, but Mahler interrupted her. "Rest easy, my love," he said. "My allegiance is only to God and to you." She stood and faced the angry sea and spread her arms wide as though inviting the roar beyond the sea, beyond the darkness, to sweep over her and take her into its depths. "That's nice," she said, drinking in the wind, seeming to prepare to fly over the washing waves, coming closer and closer. Her blue and white cloak flew off her shoulders and into the night, leaving only her tunic to protect her from the storm, drawing in tight around her waist by a cord of gold to flap furiously around the solidity of her legs. She was strong against the wind, and it stirred desire within Mahler. The blue and gold of her embroidered neckline looked ink black as the night that surrounded her, and it gave her a ghostly look as though her head floated above her body. Jesus of Sai was barking furiously. Mahler could hear the roar of a mighty wave starting to break above their heads, could feel it, sense it. The devil himself must have been giving her courage, for if she would have stood a moment longer, the wave would have caught her, would have caught them both. Mahler glimpsed its enormous black wall and grabbed her around the waist and ran backwards with her, so that all they faced was the unsettling rush of sand and surf around their knees. He gripped her shoulders and looked into the hollow of her eyes. "Are you all right, my love?" "Yes," she said with a voice ever the more distant. "Yeah, the water barely touched my ankles." No, said Mahler. "I don't mean that. I mean because of this afternoon, because of what happened, because of what the brother of Athronges had done to you. Are you all right?" She began to tremble and tears came, and she gestured yes with a quick wave of her head. "Because I spoke with your father. It is what I've been waiting to tell you. We will get you to a physician. Your father and I are united in this. It will be private. No one will know." She shook her head. "I am all right. I have some pain, not much, and some bruising, but I'm fine, and I purified myself with the doves. But please understand, good wife, you need not fear me. No harm will come to you from my hand, nor from your father's, nor from anyone else." "You will not have me stoned?" "Of course not. But what about the law? The word of God binds you to do so." He shook his head in stiff motions. "No one believed that I would, but please believe me, I would never do so. I would not do such a thing, nor will your father, nor will anyone else, nor will God himself, if I have the power to stop it. Your father and I are united in this. God could come down and stand right here in front of me and prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that he is God in order for me to have you stoned, and I would refuse. So then it is decided. You will simply grant me a divorcement instead and ask God for forgiveness." It's not God. It's not God I am asking for forgiveness. It is you. I ask you for forgiveness. She looked at him in surprise and said nothing. "We shall live a long life together as husband and wife," Mahler said, "providing you can grant me the forgiveness for which I ask, for what I said to you on the beach and for allowing you to think, even for a moment, that I would bring to you such abuse. I am the one who deserves to be stoned." "It is granted," she said. He nodded. "Thank you. I needed to hear it, that you have forgiven me." She laughed. "I didn't mean that," she said. "I meant that it's granted you be stoned." And she picked up a pebble and with a little flick of her finger bounced it hard off his forehead, like one would flick a marble, and smiled broadly as it brought up an immediate knot. It was part of her personality. She just always did the goofiest of things. Laughter forced its way through the stone silence of Mahler's lips. In spite of his efforts to counter it, he threw out his hands to show his tangled amusement. "Whatever in God's holy name possessed you to do such a thing as that?" he said. Then he bent over and bared his backside. Go ahead, give it your best throw. One whizzed by him, missing him completely. He laughed and taunted her. One more. Put a little aim into it this time. He slapped his bare bottom. Right there. Instead, she rammed her foot, bedecked in one of the sandals that had one time graced the foot of the goddess Diana, soundly into his bare flesh. It set him sprawling. Now I forgive you, she said, and jumped on top of him with huge kisses in complete defiance of tradition and law, where women are supposed to ask permission before engaging in affection. I cannot believe you did that, he said, half laughing, looking up at her, spitting out sand, moving hair from her eyes so he could see into them. The hole in the sky was still there, still illuminating that which was below, and it encased her in an aurora of dusty white. You know what? You and I will have many children, and they shall be blessed by God. For to honor you, as I did under the chuppah, is to honor God. To place you above all else is to place God above all else. Another wave came. They scrambled to their feet and ran from its deadly path. There is sometimes humor in danger for reasons not at all logical, and they both laughed, and a pang of fear came as he realized the dog was not there beside him. Jesus, he yelled out, where in the name of Bacchus did that animal go? Jesus! I don't see him. Jesus! He's right there. Rachel pointed toward the sea. Where? I don't see him. Right there. She pointed again. He's looking away from us. There, right there. You can see his curled up tail and his little winky-eyed butthole. Sure enough, all that was visible was the little nugget-sized button of pink from an arched-over tail. He was sniffing and yapping as the foam sizzled up onto the sand to engulf his feet, jumping back and barking again, a sound lost to the roar of the wind. The yellow and white fur blended so well with the silver and black of the ocean that the two are nearly indistinguishable, save for that little button of pink. Jesus, get over here! Though he was ignoring Mahler's commands, all it took was for Rachel to slap her knees and click her teeth. Come, Jesus, she called out sweetly, after which the animal complied, happy to be free of the overbearing duty he had assumed for himself of saving the ones he loved from the dragon the sea had become, with its gaping jaws of water and its breath of ice. Moments later, an enormous black wall crashed onto the very spot. The tops of the date palms were beginning to lie sideways. The wind was that strong, now full of stinging water, it had blown out the guardian lamps of the gateway. Mahler and Rachel were running for the doors, still laughing. She had picked up her cloak along the way. It had wrapped itself around a leafless bush and was waving it over her head like a banner. Jesus of Sai was now beside himself with confusion, barking, running, yapping, twisting in circles. The doors moaned as they pushed on them, slabs of iron and wood 3 times the height of a man. The cylindrical wood pivots shook, and soon the 2 lovers and their dog were inside, dropping the bar in place behind them. A rush of heat greeted them, rising up from the mosaic floor. It prickled his skin. Good, she said. Shama has the fires going. She took his hand like she was a mother and he was a foolish boy. Tonight, my love, we will sleep like Romans and Greeks, with hypocaust heat. And I don't want to hear any complaining about it. Let the winds fly and the skies wail. The storm whirled and howled above the compluvium, but did not enter. The entire atrium area was protected, other than an occasional leaf or tree bough falling through to disturb the water of the pool below. The inner torches were still burning, casting yellow light upward to show the reason the pool was so calm. A sheet of water, smooth enough to walk on, was being blown over, as if it were a part of the roof. Mahler could hear the cisterns overflowing from the rush of channeled rainwater. He could hear the crack of thunder distant in the sky. Though not yet the time, Mahler was half expecting Rachel would conceive for them a son, so sweet was the wine of their union within the calm of that storm. He could hear it continue to rage as he lay in bed beside his wife, letting the rise of the heat from the hypocaust steal into his bones, letting it drug him. A pedestal lamp calmly burned and cast itself upon the walls in shadings of yellow and black, upon intricately painted depictions of the holy city and the temple and the olive-groved hillsides. Living vines and plants adorned the bedchamber. They were there in the inner corners, able to be nourished on cloudless days by the sun, creeping and bending its way inward from the compluvium opening once the curtains were parted. There were no windows, just a span-thick wall of man-made stone, the Roman invention of hardened ash, limestone, and water. It was what was keeping the storm from entering. Only its sound could be heard, its moaning, its thudding and scraping, as the wind and rain and the sea swells assailed the two of them. The comfort within, the high platform bed with its carved posts and rolled head and footstones, the cushions of the pillows, the embroidered covers, seemed to taunt the storm, and the storm seemed to be answering back, whipping itself into an ever greater frenzy. It seemed the entirety of the ocean and the sky were being set against them. But there was nothing to fear, as long as they stayed within those walls. There is a beauty even in the midst of chaos, as long as one does not open the door. Together they were protected. The lingering of their passions reassured them of this. It was a cool fire in their hearts. As long as they did not open the door, they were fine. As long as they left the darkness to itself and left the storm in its own world, no matter the temptation, no matter the curiosity. And indeed, there is a curiosity in the darkness, an attraction to the barbaric. There is a demanding by the senses for fulfillment as the sea crashes around the fortress. Come, open the door, cry the sirens. Come, come to us. We will make evil your bedmate and soothe your wounds by making deeds of ill will just as conscionable as acts of virtue, and no more shall you want. But they stayed and slept, with Jesus of Sai curled up below them in pleasant slumber upon the warmth of the stone floor, his sides rising and falling to the tender rhythm of his dreams. And somewhere in the morning, as the first light of day began to creep in from beyond the curtains, as the fading heat from the hypocaust was giving way to a slight chill, the storm withdrew, and the good scent of a Palestine dawn drifted in, fresh with things anew. Mahler could hear the gentleness of his wife's breathing. He opened an arm and let her curve around him, and it warmed him. It was early still when she finally did awaken, well before breakfast. They lay together and talked, this couple set apart for one another by God. They talked mostly about the very different views of the world, she mirroring those of her father, those of a Sadducee, Mahler holding to the more youthful and aggressive ideas of the Pharisees. "We are so opposite, you and I," he said, and smiled and touched her cheek. "Are we a match, my love?" "It is true we are opposite," acknowledged Rachel, seeming to be proud of the fact. She took his hand in hers and looked into his eyes and got up and led him to the doorway and drew back the curtain. A wave of swallows was seesawing in the air over the shrubs of the peristylium, changing directions on a whim in complete unison, as if of one mind. The squawking of seagulls was beginning to emerge from somewhere. Where could such delicate creatures have taken refuge in a storm so violent? Fresh droplets of crystalline water were falling from the edges of the compluvium onto the marble sides of the collection pool. Through its rooftop opening, Mahler could see the dawn, scatterings of clouds, purple fragments of the leftover storm, disappearing pieces of a no longer angry sky that seemed to not quite know what to do with itself. Beads of heavy dew hung everywhere. "Do you see the loveliness of the peristylium? How it charms?" She gestured to the garden, its shrubs and vines and trimmed black flower stems, the couches and the benches of rolled gold and stone. "It was my mother's favorite place. So many opposites, silver and gold, green vines, red vines, white fruit, red fruit, water, fire, lamps, fountains. Yet together it becomes beauty." Here, more than in any other place of the house, was evidence of the massive Greek and Roman influence on Jewish society. The open-air gardens in the midst of one's home, the master's office with its columns and curtained walls, the frescoes and the mosaics. But in the center of it all, instead of the altar to Vesta, the spirit fire of human existence, was a tall and sturdy menorah, its tender flames having held strong through the storm. Alongside it, on a table of polished marble, was the ram's horn. All of Judea, all of Samaria and Galilee, all of Idumea, Idumea is the way you pronounce that, was blending with the culture of the Romans, which had blended with that of the Greeks. The Romans were absorbing the Jews little by little, as the Greeks of Alexander had done, as the Babylonians and the Assyrians had done. At least, as had been the wisdom of Nebuchadnezzar and Cyrus, the Romans allowed the Jews their religion and their worship. In exchange for that, the Jews chose to accept, even embrace, the Roman society, the modern buildings and fountains, the gardens, the roads and the aqueducts, as long as the Romans allowed them their autonomy, and as long as they kept their symbols and their statues free from sight, and as long as they did not force upon them their detestable games and their naked athletes and their prizes of graven images.